Hey everybody, how's it going? It's Rob. So for week 6, we're going to be talking about data collection, about ways of collecting data, and when you might use those different ways of collecting data. So it's all well and good to put a system in place. It's all well and good to have interventions that you think are likely to be successful, that are research based. And that you've been successful with in the past. But at the end of the day, unless we're taking data and we're seeing what direction behavior or skills are moving in, we don't really know for sure whether things are getting better. There's lots of different ways to go about taking data, and some ways are going to be appropriate for a given situation and inappropriate for other situations. One analogy that I've heard used before that I think is pretty apropos here is if you're looking to measure the temperature of the water that's in a pot, okay? What do you use to do that? Well, you'd use a thermometer because that's an appropriate way of measuring temperature. What you wouldn't do is you wouldn't use a ruler to measure the temperature of the water in a pot. Okay, it's not that a ruler isn't a good system of measurement. It can give you really accurate information about that water, but it's going to give you information about the water's depth. And if that's not what's important to you, if what's important to you is the water's temperature, you've got to use the proper tool to get the job done. We're going to find the same thing goes on with the data collection methods that we're going to use. There is a link to kind of a long lecture that I had recorded regarding all the different kinds of data collection, and I'd love for you to take a look at that as you have the opportunity, because it really fleshes out all the different ways that you can go about taking data, as well as gives you a little bit of practice taking data. And then there are some activities and exercises for you to do, data sheets for you to actually complete that focus on 4 primary methods. It focuses on frequency data, which is how often is something happening, how much is it happening. It focuses on interval data collection methods, which can be a really useful tool. It focuses on duration data, which is how long does the behavior in question last. And it focuses on latency data, which is how long does it take from when you give an instruction until someone begins engaging in the task that you're looking for them to engage in. And you can probably think, as I go through those 4 methods, that there might be different times when one thing would be appropriate and something else might not be appropriate. One really common one that I think about as an example for that is if I'm concerned about a student who's spending a fair amount of time out of his or her seat, just kind of getting up, wandering around the room, that kind of thing. What's the most appropriate way to take data on that? Some people, they tend to default to frequency, which is just how many times does it happen, right? And that can be good for some things, and it's our default because it's one that we know, it's one that intuitively makes sense to us, but it might not always get the job done. And I'll give you an example. So if we're using out-of-seat behavior and we're concerned about frequency data, we're taking frequency data, maybe I've got a 50-minute long class period, okay? And the class period starts, right? And the student is sitting at his or her desk, and then all of a sudden pops up for 1 second. I'm going to walk off screen, walks over to do something, throw something in the trash, comes right back down, sits back down in his or her seat, okay, and sits down and works, stays in seat for the entire classroom period until there's about 2 minutes left in the classroom period, and then with about 2 minutes left in the class period, gets up again one more time, goes over, looks out the window for about 10 seconds, comes back over and sits down, okay? And that's it for the class. So if we're taking frequency data on that student, how many times was that student out of seat during that class period? The answer is 2, right? They got up once at the beginning, sat right back down, got up once at the end, and sat right back down. Now the next day, let's say that what that student does is that 5 minutes into class, that student gets up out of his or her seat, goes over and looks out the window, walks around the room a little bit, talks to some friends, crumples up a piece of paper, throws it in the trash, and is wandering all around the room for about 40 minutes. And then with about 5 minutes left in class, sits back down at his or her seat and stays in his or her seat for the rest of the class. If we're taking frequency data, the number of times that student was out of his or her seat in that class period is 1. Okay? But if we think about this logically, we can see that what happened on the first day was far less problematic than what happened on the second day. But just looking at frequency data, it looks like it happened twice on the first day and once on the second day. So here's a case where maybe frequency isn't the right method of data collection for our purposes. Maybe something like duration, how long something happens for, is going to be much more telling. If we're looking at duration data, then on that first day, that student was out of seat twice, but for each time it was maybe about 10 seconds. So the total duration of out of seat behavior on day 1 was 20 seconds. Whereas on day 2, even though it was only one time out of seat, it lasted for about 40 minutes. The duration is 40 minutes, okay? Much more telling and much more appropriate for what we're really looking for, what's important. So it's going to be important to get some practice with these different methods of data collection and start to be able to think really critically about what's really important about the target behavior that I'm measuring. Is it the number of times it happens? Is it how long it lasts? Is it the amount of time that elapses until someone starts doing what I want them to do? Okay, what's most important? And make sure you're taking data on the things that really matter, okay? And then the other piece of it is going to be thinking about different data collection methods and how effortful they are, and making sure that you're selecting a data collection method that you're able to actually use to get accurate data. So just a little overview of the stuff that we're going to be talking about this week. A lot of this you'll hear in the lecture, and you'll get a little bit of practical experience and seeing some examples. And then the exercises this week really focus on you viewing some video and on your own, taking some data using duration, latency, frequency, and interval. So thanks a lot. Looking forward to a great week 6.